Budget Subcommittee and co-chair of the Maryland Legislative Sportsmen's Caucus. Boy, he does a lot of things. Former Garrett County Commissioner and Administrator of Garrett County Water and Sewer Systems. He's also a farmer, a business owner, and he's introduced legislation to legalize outdoor wood-burning stoves, and he does support drilling for natural gas in Maryland. So with that, I'm going to ask him to please share his comments with us. Thank you.
Okay.
Let's give him a welcome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. It's always tough to be the first one after lunch, so I hope I don't lull you to sleep. I'm not going to go into, I'm not one of those guys that are going to go into real deep depth of looking at BTUs and all the scientific information on this. I want to do a common sense approach to the use of wood for energy. They'd asked me if I wanted to do a PowerPoint, but when you're speaking from a political perspective or a legislative perspective, the only thing I think I could put up there is a picture on how you make sausage. So anyway, if we're looking at the subject here is economic benefits in the supply chain, I would like to start off a little bit just briefly in my background is that I grew up on a farm in western Maryland. My dad couldn't make it on the farm, so he started cutting mine timber, and we ended up cutting the best trees in the woods for mine posts that went into coal mines. And then we started cutting pulpwood, and I think probably my dad was still alive. He hadn't cut enough pulpwood in his life to run around the world several times. I see Red Rock Enterprise here. They're out in Garrett County, and they're now one of the biggest timber producers and handlers out in western Maryland. My dad then, pulpwood wasn't all that lucrative and a whole lot of work, and he got a sawmill and opened that sawmill in a small circular saw, and he worked on that sawmill till he was 84 years old, and now I have 2 brothers in the timber business, and I have 6 brothers and 4 sisters. So, and when we grew up, we had a pot-belly stove in the house, and so we used wood and coal to keep us warm. And my mom had a cook stove that she cooked on, and she still has that cook stove. My mom's 91; she's still using it to cook. So I can appreciate the use of wood for energy in my situation. I personally maybe am the largest landowner in the Maryland House of Delegates. Have 2 small farms and have a couple wood lots, and have 2 timber management plans on those. And so, and I really appreciate wood and use it to the extent that I can. Have a nice fireplace in my house, and when we had that big storm out there in western Maryland, I was out of electric about 6 days, and many people longer than that. And we really seen a lot of devastation, and there's a lot of wood out there now that can be used for firewood or any other purposes. That because there was a lot of devastation of trees out in that area. So I don't know whether you touched on this morning or not, but I'm going to just briefly go over, what do we use wood for to produce energy. And of course you have the basic fireplace that went way back to colonial days when they used a fireplace to heat homes, and many people still have that, but the regulations are getting more and more stringent on what you can do and how you can use fireplaces. And even new homes today, it's going to be more difficult to use a fireplace. Of course, you have the pellets. I think there was a lot of discussion on that. And then you have other uses of the sawdust and the waste products, and a lot of areas and places in Garrett County where we have sawmills and the big mills where they now have the band saws and produce a lot of sawdust and saw a lot of timber. They use that to run the heating for the operations, and also to use it to dry kill the lumber at those locations. And when they can dry kill the lumber at those locations, it really cuts down on the weight in hauling that lumber either here in the U.S. or a lot of it goes overseas. The equipment, I don't know whether anybody went into this or not, but the equipment that you need, or the various pieces of equipment that you need in order to be able to use the wood for energy, obviously energy and heat. Number one is, of course, the fireplaces, if you use that. And they now have been for some time using fireplace inserts, which reduces the amount of wood. In a fireplace you really lose a lot of the energy. And with these fireplace inserts, it's basically a wood stove that goes into the fireplace. And a lot of people are turning to those that have fireplaces to reduce the amount of wood that they have to burn. And those things generally cost those somewhere in the range of $2,500 to $5,000. Of course, you have wood stoves. More and more people in the rural areas and in my area, and obviously I don't see this ever expanding very much in the urban areas, is they're turning to wood stoves in their homes and going back to wood stoves. And a lot of the wood stoves are airtight units that they get a lot more efficiency out of the stove as far as being able to use them for heat. But those type of stoves usually run from the area of $1,200 to $2,000 or more. Then, of course, the pellet stoves, which I'm sure you already seen, they were popular at one time. I traveled out west on hunting trips and stuff, and out west they use those extensively because they have a lot of timber out there, a lot of pine, and so the pellet stove really is much more beneficial for a lot of homeowners because it's a whole lot cleaner. And then the outdoor wood stoves, the outdoor wood furnaces, it is really gaining in popularity in Maryland and elsewhere, and that's one of the legislative issues that I dealt with when I first went to Annapolis, and I'll go into that a little bit later. But those outdoor wood furnaces usually range in price from $9,000 to $15,000, and when you get installation costs, they become quite costly. And so, what are the economic benefits of using wood for fuel and energy? Maryland has a lot of forest. Out where I live in Garrett County, the state owns more than 20% of the forest out there, and a lot of that forest land in Garrett County is being set aside in wilderness and areas and other areas where around the parks and stuff where they don't harvest the timber. And that's a good thing. I think we in Maryland are fortunate enough that we do have a lot of forest, and we ought to set some of it aside for our children and their future generations to see how it looked before we took the chainsaw in there. So in those areas where they've set aside these areas, and they're also good for our tourists in western Maryland. Allegheny County, the state owns over 20% of the forest land out there also. One thing, though, we talk about renewable energy and it being a renewable energy resource. We have lots of forest, and you can periodically harvest it, but it does take a long time for a tree to grow to get to the point where it's producing timber, and a lot of the use of the forest and the wood that we talk about for heating purposes comes from what is not used for timber, not for lumber and lumbering purposes. The one thing that you got to take into account is that in using wood in any fashion for heating purposes, whether it's residential or industrial, it does require storage. You have to have some way to store the wood. And it is one thing that it is dirty, especially for people today. Years ago, when that's all you used, you had to lug it into your house and you cleaned up after it, and then you have the ashes to remove also. And so no matter what capacity you use wood in, you're going to have ash removal, just the same as coal. And so today, I think people are, as you can see, are more and more accustomed to being able to turn on the switch, turn on the thermostat, and anything that you have to do in labor-wise or cleanup-wise is just hard to overcome. Another issue, and I'm sure the foresters here and the DNR people have been dealing with wood, is we have so many invasive species anymore. The emmer ash borer and pine borer beetle and woolly adelgid and other things that we want to make sure we don't spread them all around, and so you got to be careful and handle any of these products in any fashion so that we don't damage our forest to the extent more than they are. I recently went elk hunting in Colorado, and in Colorado the mountain bark beetle is just devastating the lodgepole pine out there. Humans couldn't do the destruction that they're doing, the amount of timber the trees that are dying out there because of that devastation. So they're going to have lots of wood out there for some purpose because of that devastation. And we have here in Maryland, you all remember the gypsy moth that came through and really, and I know in my area out in Garrett County, it just really devastated the forest. And fortunately, it goes in cycles, and they don't kill all the trees. But those mountain, okay. Thank you for reminding me. You know, I get carried away. So I'm going to move on into legislative priorities and the things that we can do in the legislature to remove some of the barriers to the use of wood. And of course, you all know the Clean Air Act, when it came in, made it more difficult to use wood for various purposes. And we've seen here in Maryland with the Bureau of Air Quality Control and the emissions and things that now whenever someone puts in a wood stove or a wood furnace, the neighbors start complaining. So that's really a barrier to using these type of wood stoves or any method of burning wood because of the emissions. When I first went in the General Assembly 6 years ago, in Maryland you could buy an outdoor wood furnace. A dealer could sell the outdoor wood furnace, but after you bought it, you could not use it. So there was the Maryland Department of Environment and Bureau of Air Quality Control really didn't do much about it unless somebody complained. And when they complained, so you had this big investment in a wood stove, and so they would go out and tell them they couldn't use it. So we wanted to correct that, and so I introduced a bill with many. Dana Stein was here as one of the co-sponsors, and George Edwards introduced the senator from our area on the Senate side to allow the use of these wood, either completely outlaw them or allow the use of them. And so that bill didn't pass because MDE came and objected to it, but MDE agreed to look at the situation, and they said they wanted to wait till EPA came up with the appropriate regulations to regulate these outdoor wood furnaces. And in other states they were doing that, but if we had waited on EPA, we'd probably still be waiting. But then MDE did agree to come up with regulations and have a list of now approved outdoor wood stoves that are approved in Maryland. So you now can use those. You can buy them, you can install them, and you can use them if they're a particular brand that's been approved. So I don't want to rain on anybody's parade, but look at it from a very practical standpoint. I don't see a lot of expansion of wood usage beyond what it is now by using things like tax credits. I think the area that we need to look at expanding wood is in the production of pellets, in using the waste for energy, in those type of things. Going to the individual situations, I think just the economics of it and the fact that if people want to do it, they'll do it, and I don't think a tax credit is really going to help them that much. So I think I'm running out of time. I want to allow some time for questions, but we have this wood product in Maryland. If anything we can do for those people that are in the business and for the foresters and stuff to change regulations or to introduce things that will make it more practical to use it. One final thing I did want to mention, there is a couple fellows in Western Maryland that wanted to put in a huge big pallet facility that would have used a lot of wood to make pellets. And it was at the Matiki Coal Company, and there's a railhead there, and they run into several hurdles. Number one, they wanted to ship them by train and sell a lot of it overseas, and they couldn't get an agreement with the Port of Baltimore to take them there, and they're working with Norfolk now. But they also ran into hurdles with economic development people and getting the assistance and things that they thought they needed to be able to build this plant out there. So they're now dealing with West Virginia, and West Virginia has opened their arms and want to work with them to make this possible, which would use a lot of the waste from our area for the wood pellets. So I'll open it up to questions. Oh. The question way back here in the back.
Hi, Delegate. My name's John. I'm with the Maryland Forest Association. And you said something very important, I think, and I'd like your comments on it. There's a triangle here in the economy that we're missing the boat on. There's three facets here. There's the private landowners, there's the wood industry, and there's the forest product operators. All three of those components have to remain viable for anything to come of this meeting. And it's really, really critical that forest landowners retain the ability to manage their land and make money off their land. Making money is still a good thing in this country. The other part of it is the technical assistance for those landowners and the adequately equipped forest products operators. We don't like to use the word loggers anymore, but we need the loggers. The forest product industry in this state brings in anywhere, depending on what you're looking at in terms of the numbers, $3 to $6 billion. And our administrators and legislature in Maryland tend to forget that. That's a big bankroll of money. And when you say something like this pellet company is pulling out of Maryland and West Virginia is embracing them, there's a reason for that. And that reason stems to how we manage our government in Annapolis. And I guess I just want your comments on what we could do to broaden the perspective of our legislature.
Well, obviously, you know, I come from an area where timber and natural resources are vitally important for our economy. And as you mentioned, many of our people in Western Maryland work in that arena. And it is, I think, recognized that Maryland has been one of the states that is a leader in the environmental area. And so a lot of times there's conflict between those two areas where a lot of people don't want to see a tree cut, you know, because the tree's sequestering carbon, and so there's that conflict, and how we resolve that conflict in the legislature is really tough because, you know, being from Western Maryland and a rural area of the state, it's I think pretty common knowledge that rules and regulations and laws are pretty much governed by three large counties in the state of Maryland, and if they all get together and want something, it's pretty hard for anyone else to overcome them. And so and it's really important, I think, for Maryland when we recognize that we have the bay and how important that is to us, that we manage those forests so that it does reduce the amount of runoff and that sort of thing that goes in. But how do we balance that with the fact that a lot of people make a living, and we have all these resources that are either going to waste, or those waste products from actually timbering can be used. And I don't know how we overcome the fact that, you know, we keep hearing more and more that Maryland's an anti-business state, and how we overcome that. We'll work on that in Annapolis and meetings like this, and people need to also be involved in that and with their legislators to say, hey, we need to have jobs as well as doing things that some conceive or think that may be detrimental to the environment.
Delegate Beitzel, thank you for your presentation. You mentioned three counties as pretty much influencing policies that get passed and so on. Those counties also, principally urban, I think you mean, also have a tremendous amount of wood waste in the form of the trees that people want on the streets. They want to keep the trees, but it costs a lot of money to maintain them, and it costs money when they come down in storms like Sandy and others before it. And the very same new technologies that will allow clean combustion in the rural counties and the use of the resources also can be used in those counties. How could the legislature, the assembly, help encourage that utilization of their material that's now costing them money every time they touch it?
Well, I think it all boils down to one very, in reality, it boils down to one issue. It's got to make economic sense. And so if you go into the urban areas, not only it has to make economic sense, and be competitive to the other forms of energy that are being provided, unless we do something that offsets that, which we have in other issues with E-Power Maryland and the cap and trade and other bills that we deal with. So, and also I think it would go somewhat to the local government. Maybe they could offer some opportunities through promoting maybe heating systems for schools, or having a facility that could heat a large institutional facility or something. And so to do that, you would have to have, it needs to make economic sense, and you have to, if it doesn't, then you have to offset it with something that makes it competitive.
We've kind of run out of time in this section. Thank you very much, Bill.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.